Well, hey guys, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. Um, I just got back here to Utah yesterday. I know you're watching this on Friday, but I've only been here. I haven't even been here a full day yet. And I just finished processing the video for Wednesday, just an hour ago, and then I wrote this video so I could get it up in time so that you guys could watch this video on Friday. Keep in mind, on Friday, we are still going to have that live session, so be aware of that. But before we jump too far, today is the April 3rd. It's our 30th day. And this video is about how to proofread your essay, which is going to be really important. You guys need to know how to do this long term. So, just as a reminder, we are going to be live today. So, if you've already watched this video before normal class time, then keep in mind I still expect to see you today. And we're not going to be talking about this video. Okay, we have another subject we have to discuss. We are going to be using WebEx right now. I've just been I communicate a lot with some of my friends who I graduated with last year who are now teaching at Texas Tech at the University of Utah, where they use Zoom as their primary source. And one of the problems they're having is that people have found out how to hack Zoom, and they break into the classes people are doing, and then they disrupt the class. They cause problems. They play music over the class, or they make really loud noises, or they just cut the session off. And so until Zoom fixes that, and supposedly they're working on it, we're not going to use Zoom. Now this is a problem because some of you guys have to use WebEx, and if you're using a tablet or you're using a Chromebook, then using WebEx is a problem. And I know this personally because I'm poor, so I don't have a lot of great computing options. And so I use my Chromebook and my tablet for loads of stuff. Now I do have a desktop computer, but my desktop computer is a Mac Mini with a really cheap Walmart monitor, and it doesn't have a camera. And so the camera that I'm filming this with is just a really cheap Nikon that I got at Walmart. And like the camera I used yesterday while we were driving across country, all of that was filmed with my cell phone. So, yeah, I'm going the cheap route. I don't have a lot of options that some people do. So, I get it. WebEx is going to be hard. My classes, my poetry workshop class, they don't even get to see my face in poetry workshop. Because for that class, there's no way to get picture to go through. But for my translation class, for some reason on that one, I can be live. And it works fine. So WebEx is weird. I don't get it. It's a strange situation, but whatever. So I've done live classes with my teachers. It works. It can work for you. And we're going to try it for the first time. And the reason being is that I think FAU is starting to get serious about people doing live classes. All right. Regarding grades, that is the subject for the discussion. I will do a follow-up video to explain how grading is going to work. It's not going to change too much, but there is, for people who are just kind of riding the rails at the very minimum, there's a deal we have to talk about. And then we're just going to basically discuss problems people are having and see if I can find ways to solve some of the problems that folks are having with this class and their other classes. And so that's the point of our discussion on Friday. So hopefully I see you guys there. Keep in mind, this video is still for Friday, so this has to do with what you need to do tonight, which is turn in your final paper, and this is to help you proofread your paper. So with proofreading, one of the problems with working alone as a writer, so you guys are now finding out what it's like that web designers or content creators or freelance writers or newspaper writers today have to deal with, and that is to work alone. Novelists still get to use editors, but only the really, I'm going to be clear there, that's the really high-paid novelists. Most of the lower-paid novelists, especially the guys who are working for really small presses or are doing indie publishing, they don't have editors. They don't have any help. So people are now learning how to proofread on their own without the help of an editor or a peer reviewer. Now, in college, peer review when you can. Get your friends to help. It's awesome. It's an exchange. You could trade papers with people. It's really handy. But it is really kind of a college-only luxury. Once you get out of college, you're not going to have it. So take advantage of this while you can. I mean, 99.99% of all professional writers don't have peer reviewers or editors. And my friends who are freelancers, they write, and they're required to write without making any mistakes. And especially if they're technical writers or science writers, they're expected to be very, very precise. I've done a little tech writing, and the expectation is massive. So what do they do? What are the tricks that they use to improve? So the first one I discussed in the travel video, where I'm driving across the country, and I talk about reading out loud, and this is a really good one. Now, I do know that video was a little bit of a ramble. I didn't have a script. I couldn't look at my computer screen. But basically what you do is in your hand, you hold your paper. I use a clipboard with a highlighter, and then when I'm reading, I go like, oh, that sounded stupid, and I highlight it, and sometimes I'll just grab a pen right there, and I'll just make a note. And then I go back later, and I fix it, and then I come back, and then I read it again, go like, okay, that's better, and slowly, over time, my paper gets transformed into something that's really handy. I do it constantly with poetry. But even with short stories or with my essays or like the papers I have to turn into my classes. So like I turned in a number of papers last week. I turned in 4 small papers last week. All of those I read out loud in my bathroom. And my landlady there in Florida had to get used to me reading out loud loudly in the bathroom. And I was just saying that's just the process. It's just what I do. So there are a couple tweaks that you can do. So first, yeah, you do stand up. Yes, you read out loud. You read out loud with emotion and enunciation. But one of the things that you can do is change the font of the paper when you're reading it. Comic Sans actually is probably the best one to switch it to. It's a very natural font. It is designed specifically for people who have reading difficulties because their brains don't process letters like everyone else. So dyslexic people use Comic Sans. It's very handy for those folks. So when you are doing proofreading, switch the font up really quick into Comic Sans. Go to the bathroom, read it out loud, see the mistakes, fix it. That's a really good tweak that you can do. Now keep in mind, when you turn this into me, you have to switch it back to Times New Roman. Don't leave it in Comic Sans, but Comic Sans will help you find the mistakes. The next one that works really well is, so like you do the rough draft on Wednesday, you got it done on Wednesday, you leave it alone Wednesday night, you leave it alone Thursday, and you come back to it on Friday. And on Friday, you read through it, find some mistakes, correct your mistakes, read it out loud, make a few more corrections, then you'll say, okay, that's good. And what happens during that 24-hour period is that your brain relaxes just a little bit. It calms down, it sees things differently, and then you'll be able to catch a lot of mistakes that way. That's a really good method. Okay, so the next one after reading it aloud is using automated proofreaders. Now, I don't use them, but I do know some of my grad student friends who use it. And they've had pretty good experiences. Now, if you're in an English class, I don't recommend it. Your English professors will spot it. I mean, I don't look for it, but I know have been people who have used it. And so the big complaint is it makes your paper sound like it's made out of plastic. But when you're in a different class, like in your philosophy class or your chem class or your history class or your whatever class, why not use Grammarly, right? Those professors aren't people trained in how to write. Or they might be trained a little bit, but that's not their specialty, right? So why not use Grammarly or something like Grammarly as a way to proofread your papers? It's a really good tool. Now, it's not perfect, it has problems, but it is a really good tool. Now, if English is not your primary language, if, for example, your native language is something else, Grammarly then is a great option. And I recommend it for those of you who are in my class, who are not native English speakers, to do the free version of Grammarly and see if that helps you find some of your mistakes. I don't mind. I want you to be successful. So if that's something that will work, go ahead. And then if you find out it's something that works really well for this class, why not pay for it for the rest of your college career at least, and see if that's something that'll help you become a better writer, or at least get good grades in your classes that require you to write essays, like your history or sociology or whatever courses that require that, philosophy, All right, next is checklists. This is something I actively use. It's a great tool. And there are lots of checklists out there. You could do a Google search for different types of checklists that'll help you check your papers for different things while you're going through. I have a really good checklist that was given to me by a technical writing professor. It's about 6 pages long. It's really good. And so in the video on Wednesday, I flashed them up, 2 pages of it up there that you guys can use really quick. And those are good questions. I did change them a little bit to focus more on your needs, but those 2 checklists will help you. So I'm going to review those checklists right now with you so you can see what's available to you, and this will help you when you're proofreading. So this is a content checklist. It's a little different than other types. It focuses on what's in the paper. So have you answered the prompt? This is really important. Some of you guys are not addressing the prompt in your paper. This is something you should check for. Read the prompt again. And since we're revising, go back and read the original prompt too. Is what you're saying, is it interesting? Is the content you're writing, is it interesting? Do you find it interesting? If you don't find it interesting, I'm not going to find it interesting, even in a little bit. So make sure it's interesting. Does your exordium catch the reader's attention? I don't want a hook. I want what you write, their subject matter, to have impact. It has to have that WTF effect. Why is it important? Make sure that you're explaining that very carefully. Next, do you explore the prompt in sufficient depth? Some of you guys write really superficial papers, and it's easy to spot. Make sure you're going deeply into the prompt, going deep into the text and finding things out. If you're just doing something superficial and you're half-assing it, guess what? I know that some of you guys getting B's, some of you guys getting C's. That's one of the things that's getting it for you. Have you included a high level of detail and concrete evidence? Evidence that is direct. I'm sure you guys have heard me say your quote isn't direct, or your context and your analysis is not direct enough. Or I say something like the detail, like the context in particular, isn't reflected in the quote. Or I say your analysis isn't established by the quote. So you give analysis and I'm like, no, this isn't established by your quote. Your analysis is doing something else. That's what this is talking about. Do you have a high level of detail and concrete evidence? Is your analysis on just on task? Is it perfect? Is it dealing with what is in the quote? Not what you hope is in the quote, but what is actually in the quote. Are all the details and evidence relevant? This is really key. You've got to make sure your quotes actually apply. And you've got to make sure all your quotes are applying to your key subject. So in your narratio, you have to have 2 paragraphs of narratio. You're going to have 3 to 4 quotes in there of evidence dealing with your subject matter. Well, your support paragraphs have to actually directly apply to those quotes directly. And so you have to make sure it's working. Okay. Do you offer specific insights rather than generalizations and cliches? What I mean by cliches is stuff that people say all the time. Stuff that you hear regularly. You have to really get in there, drill down deep, and find something that is unique to you and your experience. And I know some of you guys are like, I don't have anything related to quotes. But you have your way of understanding how quotes works, or your way of understanding how Aurora works. And so you have to dig deep to find out your understanding, and not using something superficial like something I'd hear on MSNBC or on Fox or something like that. Find something very, very unique. And next, does your conclusion make an impact on the reader and answer the question, so what? That final section that I ask in the rubric is about what the academic audience is interested in. And one of the key questions is, does the reader understand this better than before? And does the text, is this something worth researching further? Is this something that's worth looking into deeper? And some of you guys are not doing well on that. It turns out that is one of the most important sections of the paper. And so this is a question that addresses that directly. So you have to make sure that WTF element is addressed directly. And the place that those are addressed directly, that's in your introduction, and that's introduction, divisio, and in your in the pre-ratio, the conclusion. Okay. This type of checklist, this is called a structure proofreading checklist. It's a little bit different. It deals with different issues. So this is where you're looking carefully at what's going on. So is the thesis statement clearly identifiable and well expressed? Well, I recognize your thesis statement as, being expressed. And so those of you who don't know if I'm seeing your thesis statement, when I see your thesis statement, I go, oh, that's the thesis statement. I highlight those in yellow. So some of you guys have seen your thesis statements highlighted in yellow, or what I think your thesis is. It's in yellow. And that right there should say, oh, Aaron sees my thesis. If you've been like, oh, Aaron isn't highlighting anything in my papers, that means I'm not seeing your thesis. You've got to make sure it's plain. So I review that video that I wrote earlier about how to write a thesis statement. Go look at that again. Make sure your thesis is right on, because there's some good ways to make sure you have a quality thesis. So watch that video again, or go and read the slideshows that are up on Canvas. Are the theme and thesis put in context? Meaning, do you have enough information to explain why your thesis is important? That's part of the point of the narratio. So you're going to have 2 paragraphs of narratio where you have to establish, using research, to maybe give a little history or give a little bit of definition to what your subject is, where you go into detail using research, outside research, to establish what the subject of your paper is. Okay. Do the paragraphs flow smoothly? Are there any gaps or jumps? That comes from if how you're using quotes doesn't flow smoothly. So, for example, the worst in these came from the Aurora thing, where people in one paragraph would be talking about meritocracy, and then they would jump not into another thing about meritocracy or how meritocracy and egalitarianism work together, but they'd go off onto some crazy tangent on something that hasn't related to anything. And then it would just be really jarring, and so I would write down jarring transition. Or in the Coates one, if you're dealing for 3 paragraphs about the streets, and then suddenly you switch into how, about the school, that's not related. Do you see what I'm saying? So you've got to all of your paragraphs have to flow smoothly. They have to go from point to point really smooth all the way through. Does each point build upon the previous point? So that's why you keep everything together. So schools with Coates, you focus there. Or use streets, 4 or 5 things about the streets from Coates. Or his family life. You can talk about his mom and his dad, or his son. You could talk about those things with Coates, and how he uses pathos to explain how his education came more from the hands of his father, who beat him, and his mother, who made him write at night. So those are things that are important. So you could focus on those. Okay. And they build on each other, and you continue developing that throughout the entire paper. And so you've got 5 great paragraphs about, his mom, and then you switch to, life on the street and some kid holding him up. Or you've got that Nas quote in there. That's not going to be good. So make sure they build up on each other all the way through. Does each paragraph have a topic sentence? And are the transitions clear and easy to spot? Now, I'm really good at spotting your transitions, and some of you guys really suck at them, and some of you guys are very brilliant at them. That video I did yesterday has a lot yesterday while I was driving. The Wednesday video does have a lot of good information about transitions. Now, I know that video is kind of rambly, but it does have good stuff on transitions. Watch it again. Make sure your transitions go through smooth and easy. Are the details, evidence, and discussions well integrated? This means, do you have good analysis and context, and do you wrap your analysis back to the topic? Okay? Do you use your keywords throughout? So if you have a specific keyword like pathos, are you using it a lot? Some of you guys made arguments about pathos, but you never used the word pathos. You use substitution words for pathos. No, it doesn't always work. So make sure you're using the term pathos or other keywords throughout your paper. It's okay to repeat. I talked about that on that Wednesday video. It's okay to repeat in academic writing, especially if it's the keywords of your paper. Vary other things up, switch other things up, but keep those keywords consistent. That'll make sure that the details, evidence, and discussions are well integrated. Is the essay clear and coherent? This comes to your transitions and to your conclusion. If your transitions and your conclusion are muddied and weird, people aren't going to get your paper going like, I don't get it. Or if the subjects jump around too much between paragraphs, it's not going to work really good. That's why you have to have that smooth, built-up crescendo of information. Okay. Is the structure visible in terms of front material, body, and back material? Now, I know you heard me say some new terms in that last video. These are writerly words. Front material. Well, the front material, those are three things. That's your exordium, that's your narratio, and that's your divisio. Well, the regular terms for that are your introduction, okay, then your subject matter analysis or your review of literature, and then your division or partition. Those three things are what build up the front material. And the partition, that's basically your mapping, where you show what you're actually writing about in your paper with your thesis, and then you're showing the mapping of what's going to happen next. Then you have the bulk of the paper that comes next, which is the body, and then last you've got your counter argument and your conclusion at the very end. That's the back material. Okay? Notice that that's very similar to the three-act structure that you see in movies or you see in novels. We deal with this all the time. This idea of front material, body, and back material. This is very classic Roman and Greek story structure. It's been around for a long time. Get used to it, especially, well, in creative writing, it's something I'm really into. But as you become more and more of a academic writer, especially those of you who are going into engineering and sciences, where you're going to write big papers, get used to the terms front material, body, and back material. And then last, does it have impact? Does your structure give impact to your paper? Now, I taught you the best structure available, the 6-part structure. It has impact. If your partition or your divisio have really good structure, then it's going to really add power and guidance for the whole thing. If your narratio really defines well what's happening with your research on the subject matter, your readers are really going to get it. This is a structure that has impact. If it's manipulated well, if it's written well, then you're going to get that A. Not just from me, but from your future professors as well. It's a really good structure. Okay, so those are 2 pages worth of checklists that work really well. Now, there are other checklists out there too. Go ahead and look those up. They're very handy. Not all of them are as detailed as that, but those 2 pages are really good. The next one is find someone who likes your paper. Okay, excuse me, I'm going to say that differently. I wrote it right in the slideshow. Find someone who sorta likes you to read your paper. And what I mean by, you know what I mean by sorta likes you. You're like, you're friends, but you have a shaky relationship, but you still have respect. It's someone who's willing to be honest with you and say, yeah, you suck, but they're not going to tear you apart and make you feel bad. These are people that are really nice to have around. So this isn't peer reviewing. This is where you hand your paper to a friend or a family member who does not mind telling you the truth about your writing. So, and you kind of have to be willing to expose yourself to someone who already thinks you're kind of an idiot. So I have a couple of people in my life who are going like, yeah, Aaron, you're a moron, but we like what you do as a writer. I don't mind reading your writing to help you. So it doesn't matter if they dislike you a little bit, as long as they're willing to be honest. So you can't use your mom. I can't use my mom. My mom doesn't work for this, because my mom loves me, and she's going to tell me she loves me, that, Aaron, you did a great job. And I can't use my dad to... My dad will go overboard, for one thing. That's how my relationship with my dad. He'll basically rewrite my paper. And I don't want that because it still has to be my paper. So I use my brother Pat. My brother Pat is a lawyer. He's very successful. He sues doctors. That's what he does. He's a nurse. Actually, right now he's working in hospitals with the coronavirus thing. And he's a nurse, but he's also a lawyer, and he knows how to put doctors in jail. And that's what he does for a living. And so my brother and I, we like each other because we're brothers, but at the same time, we have 50 years of competition and dislike and disdain for each other. And so he'll send me briefs that he wants me to look at that goes to a judge, because I don't mind tearing him apart and finding areas that'll help him, but also show him where he's got problems. And he's looked at a few of my important papers to do the same thing. So having a relationship with someone that sort of likes you, has respect for you, but doesn't mind telling you the truth, that's someone who you want to read your papers. And so a loved one like your mom or your dad, or like a lover or your husband or your partner, those don't work. They can work, but it typically doesn't. Now the biggest thing about this video is that if you do not have access to peer reviews, that you need to find a way to proofread your papers, something that works for you. You have to have a process of some sort. It's true in this class, and it's true in everything else you do. It's going to be true after you leave college. You've got to find a process where you can read over things. I'll tell you right now, the heaviest proofread thing I ever wrote in my life, and it's the most profitable thing I ever wrote in my life, and it's the thing that got me into grad school, was a single email. Okay? It took me 2 days to write it. It worked fantastically, and it's what got me into grad school. Okay? Get in the habit of proofreading. Get in the habit of proofreading things that are important. And it's not always going to be what you think is important. So like in my case, it was an email. My papers that I write for my classes, I do have peer reviewers, but I also proofread very carefully. And I listen to my peer reviewers. Now, if you remember in that comic we had, they did have another method, which is where you take what you wrote and you chop it up and you rearrange things and you find things. Follow what that comic said. That's not a bad way, because then at least you can see if there are other structures that work. That's also what's nice about using those cards. That gives you a way to make sure you can manipulate your information. It's just another way of looking at your data to see if there's another way to review things. And that's it. Good luck with your papers that you're turning in. I'm really excited about it. I should be catching up with your grading pretty soon. I want the grading to be done completely, because I can't have your grading hanging over me as we go into the end of the semester. And so hopefully I can catch up on everything quick, because I've got final projects to do. I've got a lot of translations to do, so I've got a comic to draw and a comic to write, so I've got a lot of stuff. You're the same way. So I'm going to try to catch up as much as I can and stay on top of it, so later on we're not dealing with this.